Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to see so many friendly faces, mostly friendly than many, but anyway, the quantity is not always a quality, so we are very much delighted to open this new lecture from our Constitutional Imaginary series. These are series organized as a part of the Summit EU VASC project and as part of my strand. So my strand relates to two main topics: emergency constitutionalism and constitutional polycrisis, something which we are going to discuss tomorrow in a huge international conference with prominent speakers, some of which are with us, Professor Baker, for example, and of course Dr. Sadowski. But also we organize this lecture series, and there are two main lecture series as part of this project. The second one is emergency constitutionalism. We had two lectures during the summer semester, and now we have, I would say, the third lecture from the Constitutional Imaginary series. The previous lectures were devoted to constitutional geometry as paradigm for ordering of complex constitutional orders, where it was a lecture of myself together with Dr. Maja Zahadzic from the University of Utrecht. And also we had the pleasure to have also Professor Francesco Palermo from Urag Bolzano, and there we spoke about a paper which are just in the course of being published, devoted to imaginary territories. Right. So this is the third lecture in this lecture series, and I'm pleased to welcome Mirosław Sadowski, who is actually lecturer at the University of Strathclyde, Glasgow, Scotland, UK, which is sufficient challenge for everybody trying to pronounce properly Strathclyde.
Yes,
right.
You did master fully.
I'm preparing for my trip there.
Yes.
Right, so I'm training morning and evening about that. Right. So a few words about our distinguished speaker tonight. Mirosław has made history in the Latin American and Ibero-American countries, because he's also a postdoctoral researcher within a very interesting project, Mnemonic Reality. So I deserve another bonus for pronouncing mnemonic properly, which is allocated in a university which sounds Canadian, but it's in Lisbon,
yes.
Right? Alberta University in Lisbon, Portugal. And he has been also a postdoctoral fellow at the Brazilian Center. Sebra. Okay. Yes. So not good enough in pronouncing such abbreviations. The Brazilian Center of Analysis and Planning in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And of course I can continue reading his rather telling CV, but I think that he's one of the most promising and brilliant young scholars who made his name in the sphere of memory politics, to an extent, I hope, in the future in constitutional imaginaries, because we're in the course of preparing a joint paper together on this. Right, and his topic today will be memory politics and legal institutions of memory. You can see probably a book that he will probably announce also during his talk.
Yeah.
Okay, and I just want to announce also this book. It's already a bit old. In 2020, it was published in 2020 with Edward Elgar, but we published it with a colleague of mine. It's devoted to, the title is Revolution, Transition, Memory and Oblivion, Reflections on Constitutional Change, and there I have a chapter on constitutional memories, how do constitutions cope with constitutional past. So that's our shared interest with Mirosław. That's a passion about how constitutions memorize, how they reflect, how they imagine in legal, socio-legal, and also a symbolic imaginary way the histories from the past. And we know that the histories can be true, but also there can be a range of narratives, and these narratives are sometimes counterfactual. A clear example of that is the damnatio memoriae, when you negate the past. A very good example would be France and the annihilation of the regime of Vichy in the post-World War II France, but also there are other forms of oblivion, not so necessarily institutionalized. And if you read the preambles of many constitutions, mostly beyond the West, because in the West we pretend to be rather rational, despite the fact that we never properly lost the link to transcendentality as Heidegger or Schmidt were concerned. But anyway, if you look at mostly non-Western constitutions, you can see official histories there, sometimes codified in the preambles. If you look at the constitution of Egypt, you can see the official version of the Egyptian civilization in the Islamic world. If you look at many African constitutions, such as Angola and Mozambique, you will see villains from the past, colonizers, hopes for the future. And if you look at Asia, you will see again a range of narratives. So the constitutions are really a transtemporal bridge, bridging the constitutional past to the constitutional present and looking towards the constitutional future. Tomorrow we're going to talk about the dark side and the dark memories, but today I don't want to be that gloomy as I'm usually traditionally, so I'm just giving the floor to Mirosław. We'll have 40 minutes to up to 1 hour, and then you will have sufficient time for questions, discussions, and so on. So, Mirek, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Martin. All right, so Martin did all the introductions masterfully, so now I can dive straight into the topic. So I won't be talking about the preambles today, because I'll be talking about the preambles tomorrow at the wonderful conference that Martin put together, along with the great team from the University of Sofia. So thank you everyone who's involved in the project. Memory politics and legal institutions of memory. To land on this title, it took us a little bit, and a couple months, I think, between different ideas how to frame the topic of today's lecture. In the end, I'll probably still talk about lots of different things.
Can I just interrupt you? Yeah. That's a typical Bulgarian hospitality when you give the floor to the people and then you just move them out of the microphone. I just forgot to announce something which is really big and interesting, in which we are both involved. We just published a special issue of the review of Central and East European law, and it's devoted to constitutional transitions in Central and Eastern Europe, where we also research and explore and expose the constitutional transitions from a symbolic imaginary perspective. So I have two papers there, but Mirek's paper is there, and many brilliant scholars such as Erzsébet Zsivan, Zoltán Szente, Petr Aga, Kozmin Churchill, and Vlad Belavuzau, the Grand Master of Mnemonics. So if you're interested, take a look at the Brill webpage, review of the special issue just published there on their webpage, and you can even read the paper of Mirosław Sadowski.
Well, and the paper of Martin Belov as well, of course. Right, so defining what memory is usually how I start talking about these topics, and as where I'm going to start today, because the concept of collective memory is, I would say, still something that's quite well, it's not exactly new. It's been around for almost hundreds of years, but still, even within the social sciences, sometimes people struggle with its conceptualization. So that's where I'm going to start also. So the concept of that the memory is not individual but collective has, of course, existed in history through thousands of years. If we think about ancient Greece, for example, we've had the so-called mnemonic scholars already functioning there, including some of the famous philosophers who have taken on such a role. However, fast forwarding to the 1920s, the father, or some people call him grandfather of modern sociology, Maurice Alvax, a French Jewish sociologist, coins the term collective memory in 1920s, publishing a number of books, and since then his idea has been developed, redeveloped, and adapted in many different ways. But in principle, whenever we talk about collective memory, we still go to the Alvax's original idea, and that original idea tells us that when we actually remember. That's mine, Martin.
I know.
No, but I'll be needing it for the. Sure. Okay. Whenever we remember something, we don't remember necessarily individually, but actually our memories are influenced by those of others. And he argumented that since we are part of many different groups, so we're part of our group of workers, part of the family, part of a particular religion, that means certain memories are going to be received in such a way that will influence our perceptions, even though even though technically we'll think that we came up with those particular memories on our own. And of course, looking around the room today, there are quite a lot of people who are members of the Sofia University. So of course, there are others who are here just for a conference, and there are those who are just in this room, but there are also people who are not in this room. So all of us in this room will have a memory of this lecture that was born collectively because other people did not take part in this lecture, so we might tell them about it. But it's not something that they experience themselves. Usually when I'm explaining the concept of collective memory to students, and when they are still unconvinced, I ask them always to close their eyes for a couple of seconds and start thinking about their first memory from childhood. People usually come up with something, usually when they're about 4, 5, 6 years old. Everyone has a particular memory from that time, and then I ask them to open their eyes and start actually thinking if this is really their own memory or has it been influenced by what their parents told them. This might have been first day of kindergarten, for example. So do you really remember your first day in kindergarten, or is it actually what you've seen on the photos, home videos, what your parents, grandparents told you? And so on. So that's the concept. Of course, it's been criticized in many different ways. Susan Sontag famously said that there's no such thing as collective memory. In Germany, the pair of social cultural studies specialists, Jan and Aleida Asmens, they created their own concept of cultural memory, which was supposed to sort of include collective memory just as a part of the larger cultural memory. However, we are in the 90s, when the term started being picked up more and more, a lot of historians protested that collective memory is taking over what used to be history studies domain. We are where we are right now. Memory, collective memory, and memory studies are a growing discipline. There's even a journal right now that's just called Memory Studies, and that proposes that it's even a separate idea that's interdisciplinary. I think that whereas I agree that study of memory needs to be interdisciplinary, every discipline has to do it on their own, because in the end we come from different viewpoints. So a lawyer's perspective on law and collective memory will be a different perspective than that of a political scientist on law and collective memory. And talking about politics, why is this concept of collective memory so important? Because unlike history, which is usually left to the historians, and well, of course, historians from different countries and from different backgrounds will narrate the history differently. In the end, history is supposed to be something based on facts. The way we present the facts may differ. However, hopefully, at the basis, we have facts. However, memory, of course, can be changed, can be adapted, can be amended. People forget things. I'll be telling later about Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, but for example, it's been proven that during the trials before Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, it turned out that when groups of people were giving evidence, quite often their collective memories, the memory that they created as a dissident group for a number of years in the old regime, was actually not based on facts anymore, because they coalesced a number of different memories into one narrative, and then when you had an actual discussion based on facts, it turned out that their memories were not always necessarily true, because they put together many different stories into one. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. So collective memory is basically malleable, and as such it can be used by politicians, or more broadly speaking, by different people in the positions of authority. However, politicians are those who are of particular interest to us lawyers, because they create laws, and these laws affect our reality, of course. And there's a number of what the Belov, the grandmaster, as Martin called him, of memory studies. Ulet proposed that the term of memory laws to designate everything that can be relates law and memory in some way. So laws that regulate the street names, for example, laws that regulate public commemorations, but also laws that tell us exactly how to remember something or how to forget something. Everything should be called a memory law. In my book and in my research, I take a more narrow view, and I propose the term of memory legislation to talk specifically about those instances when we have an impact of law, a direct impact of law on collective memory. But again, I'll get to that later. So how and why politicians do that? So why do we have this political employment of collective memory? Well, Martin talked about preambles. Preambles are, of course, a good example, because we have a new constitution usually after a regime change, and as such the story needs to be retold, and an official narrative needs to be created for the new state, and as such the law that the state will have. So starting from the preamble, which is in the constitution, so the basis for any modern legal system, we have a preamble that tells us exactly how the country thinks about its past, what's its relation with the past. Some preambles are shorter, like Bulgarian constitution, for example, has a rather short preamble. Some, like Poland and Hungary, are extremely long and go into great detail into how we are supposed to perceive the past. And many countries are in between. However, or most constitutions do have a preamble, and it somehow refers to the past, setting the stage for many other laws that will regulate collective memory and official narratives. And of course, I mentioned that this happens usually after a regime change. So every regime has a sort of official narrative. Democratic societies do that too. The United States of America and France are usually good visual examples from democracies. 4th of July in the United States, and the various symbols that are used throughout the country to build up the national spirit and create that and establish and maintain the narrative. Also flags that in the US can be found on anything from clothes to public buildings, to many different places. This links, supposed to link people with that past, the 4th of July being the culmination day for the nationalistic memory in a democracy, of course. Same goes with France and 14th of July, and in France the build-up around the French Revolution, which of course has a particular legacy, especially as we look at it from today's perspective. However, this is used, including the French national anthem, of course, which stems from that time, and it's always a particular feeling, I think, when you're in France, and if you know French and you see little kids talking about, basically going to war and doing a bunch of things there. But it's there, it links the French with the foundation of contemporary France. Whether it was actually the foundation of contemporary France, of course, it can be debated, but that's the official narrative. And if we go to non-democratic regimes, quite often these forms of establishing official narrative, they go to extremes. So of course we all know from photos, for example, Hitler's visit to any city, the whole city would be draped in Nazi flags. Swastika suddenly started appearing everywhere on everything in the 1930s. Even if you buy porcelain on flea markets, if it's from that time, you see that the stamp of major manufacturers, Rosenthal and others, it suddenly has a swastika attached to it. Same, of course, goes with the Soviet imagery. So, of course, here in Sofia, there's the removed monument of the Soviet friendship.
But semi-removed.
Semi-removed, exactly, because the plinth remains. And of course, all of these cities had to, in the Soviet sphere of influence, have this sort of a monument, they had to have Lenin's heads and Marxist imagery that in certain instances remains to this day. For example, after the current stage of the Russo-Ukraine war, Ukraine decided to remove all the remaining Lenin's heads, and suddenly turned out that it was still a couple hundred, if not a couple thousand, that were still somewhere around the country. So official narrative is there, and it's gonna be there. An interesting process, obviously, and returning to this issue of a regime change. So, of course, the preamble is and the new constitution is usually appearing, but what is happening in the broader scale, which is just one point of it, is what I called in my research a collective memory inversion, because we had a previous regime which established one official narrative. Let's stay with the Soviet example, since most of the people in this room are probably quite familiar with it. So we had one official narrative that was the official narrative for 70, 80 years, and suddenly we have a change. So the new regime comes with the oppositionists who have their own official narrative that sort of takes off the old official narrative from the board and replaces it with its own. So Michel Foucault proposed a particular term that he called counter-memory. So we have the official narrative and we have the counter-memories, so those memories that are not of the official version, but of the main group of that holds power in the current country. So he was talking, of course, about the United States mostly, but in non-democracies, so the United States, where the minority groups would be the ones that have counter-memories. But in non-democratic societies, it's quite often the majority of the society that has counter-memories to the official narrative. So in the process of collective memory inversion, it's quite interesting to observe, because suddenly the counter-memories of the oppositionists become the official narrative, whereas the old official narrative becomes counter-memory, and you quite often have, depending on society, country, you have certain groups that still cultivate this counter-memory. In Italy, for example, you still have a certain part of the society that remembers fascism as something good and still celebrates in various days connected to the fascist regime. So this is just one of the examples of how counter-memory can work. Another counter-memory example was of course connected to the 2020 and the Black Lives Matter movement that took to the streets and started pulling down quite a lot of monuments in the States mostly, but also in a couple other Western countries. So we had the counter-memories of a particular group who decided that their memories came the time that their memories be included and respected in the public spaces. As such, they decided to take the matters into their own hands and amend the official narrative in that way. Of course, the issue remains as to the methods and how to best include divergent or dissonant collective memories into the official narrative, but that will be a topic for another lecture, I think. So once we have the official narrative in a way established in a country, be that continuously, as in the case of the United States, more or less for a couple hundred of years, or in the case of the United Kingdom, since the union of England and Scotland at least, or since if we had a collective memory inversion, and it's a more recent change, we have the official narrative there, but now we have to think of ways to implement it. And that's the process of implementation of official narrative and the linked collective memories is called memory politics, which is there in the title of today's lecture. So how to do that? Because writing a constitution, of course, is the easy part, at least when it comes to the preamble. Well, we put together people or one person in a room, lock them up, and they will come up with a constitution. That's quite often happened, especially in the CE countries, or have or had basically, for example, in Czechoslovakia almost had quite a lot of ideas for the constitution before the 1989 revolution even happened. So the constitution was the easy bit. Now, how to make a society think in this particular way, how to put this official narrative into work. Well, that's not an easy task, of course, but what is usually done is what was happening in 2020 across the ocean. So, starting with the visual elements. So first of all, what is usually changed are the street names. There are always some street names that the previous regime utilized, that the opposition is and the general public hate, so they have to go. The process of changing the street names can be fast or can be quite long, and it depends on the revolutionary vigor, I would say, of the new authorities. I wrote a study with my colleague Sayed Zavareh on how it looked in the case of Iran and the Iranian Revolution. So, for example, it was very visible. It was a good case because we had a transition from one non-democratic society to another non-democratic society, but with two very different regimes, and as such, different official narratives and different imaginaries connected to it. So, for example, it turned out that it really depended after the Iranian Revolution on who currently held the power within the Revolutionary Council. So some streets, or a couple of major streets in Tehran that changed the name 5 times across the many years. This is of course an extreme example, but sometimes it's even perceived as necessary by the new authorities to do. This also comes in waves. Usually we have the changes to those names that are particularly offensive to the new regime. And then the revolutionary vigor usually settles down and then comes up sometimes as a political issue. So this was the case of the Russo-Ukraine war, which I already mentioned, but it also had an impact on other countries in Central and Eastern Europe, which suddenly decided to go further and deeper than they did in the 1990s and changed more street names. And another aspect, the aforementioned monuments, because as I mentioned, the visuals are usually quick and easy to be done. So in addition to changing the street names, we have the removal of monuments. And once again, we usually start with those that are most offensive. However, those more complicated, such as those of the brotherhood or friendship, depending on the version between the current country and the Soviet Union, can prove actually quite divisive to be removed, as the case in Bulgaria, but even in Warsaw for many years. The monuments, there was a huge discussion about leaving the monuments. It was finally removed about 15 years ago, but still it proved to be a source of debate, and right now it's elements of it have been placed in the newly opened a couple of weeks ago Museum of Contemporary Art in Warsaw, sparking even more debate. In Estonia in 2007, I think there was a huge issue around the bronze soldier statue, which was sort of a reimagined element remaining from the Soviet time, and in 2007, when it was finally removed by the government of Estonia, it actually led to huge protests by the Russian minority living there, and some people were even seriously injured, if memory serves. So all of this is of course divisive in certain ways, and it's still in a way the first step as to how to employ memory politics and how to connect official narrative to the rest of society. So the second step in most countries is employing the second step in many countries is creating a special institution that will take care of the national memory. So it started with Germany and the so-called Gauck Institute, which was tasked with taking over the Stasi, the secret police of the DDR archives, in order to prepare the documents for the general public, and also tasked with creating the official narrative of that time. However, the idea was soon taken by the other countries of Central and Eastern Europe, and right now almost every country, including Bulgaria, actually has some sort of a institute of memory. A very Orwellian name, of course, Institute of Memory, but that's how most of them are called. That's how the Polish one is called, that's how the Ukrainian one is called. So Institute of Memory. Sometimes the translation to English is Institute of National Remembrance, but and in my book I wrote that it's not, because in Polish it directly translates to Institute of Memory, and no one would understand it.
How does it sound in Polish?
Instytut Pamięci Narodowej.
Popular memory.
Well, the nation's memory, national memory, but yes, but it is an institute of memory, not of remembrance, because that's a completely different word in Polish.
Yeah.
So the different institutes of national memory, they were usually created already in the 1990s, and again tasked with dealing with the communist, but in the case of Poland and a few other countries, also the Nazi past. So really recreating the official narrative and making sure that history textbooks are written in a certain way, making sure that money is given to researchers studying history in a certain way, which of course meant that every single government was always hoping to be the one to choose the head. And focusing on the Polish case here, the Polish Institute of National Memory has a huge budget. It was, I think, 92 million euros a couple of years ago, and it grows usually every year. So that means that most historians in the country are the ones that are employed. Historian researchers are the ones that are employed by the Institute of National Memory. So of course this leads that the grants that are awarded to history research, and the history research that's promoted with the museum, with exhibitions. The Polish Institute of National Memory specializes in doing traveling exhibitions that they put in public spaces, in main spurs of the cities, where everybody passes and can see them. When I was in Vilnius in May for a conference, I was walking around, and there was actually a traveling exhibition that was a collaboration between the Polish and the Lithuanian equivalent of Institute of National Memory. So, of course, it's not necessarily a critique of these institutions, it's just an observation that they usually, even if they don't want to, they become politicized because of the power, also financial power, that they have to influence the spread of the official narrative, and being able to shape it in a particular way. And of course, the head of the institute is chosen by the government, but usually has a term. So sometimes you may even have a dissonance, like currently in Poland, the head of the Institute of National Memory was still chosen by the previous government, who had a particular collective memory policy, whereas the new government has a different one. But of course, they cannot impact it through the institute, because they have to wait for the term of the current head to run out. So the institutes are just one example of how, and it's an administrative example of how especially public institutions can be created to spread the official narrative. But of course we have many institutions that already are established, such as museums. So museums are often created anew, or their exhibitions are changed. So in Poland, for example, there is a huge debate, and that's in a way still ongoing, about the museum of the Second World War in Gdańsk, which received enormous funding. However, the idea, as it turned out, after it first opened, the idea of the historians behind it was to show an objective version of the history of the Second World War, which meant that the Polish part of the history of the World War II was not what was presented in a way that the Polish people were not accustomed to, and not what they expected after paying a couple $100 million for a new museum. So when the museum was started by the Liberal Party, but then when the Conservative Party, governing until last year, came to power, they immediately changed the museum director and they changed the exhibit, which led actually to the original creators of the exhibition to sue the new government for changing the exhibition, and as such impacting their intellectual property laws, which was a very interesting case to follow. And right now we have a liberal government once again, so they put the old museum director back and made the changes to the exhibition in a way to put it the way that was originally. However, there were so many public protests that certain elements had to stay. In Hungary, the idea of Viktor Orban was a bit different. So yes, there were changes to the existing museums, but the main memory policy was supposed to be and is done to this day through the newly constructed museum. So the main museum is called Terrorháza, or the House of Terror in Budapest, which is in former secret service from the communist time headquarters, and it narrates the history of Hungary as the victim of two totalitarianism, so Nazism and communism, even though, of course, until 1944, the Hungarian government was collaborating with Hitler. That's something that you won't hear about in this museum, or if you do, it will be presented in a very peculiar way. I still remember when you enter the museum and you see a map of Hungary before the war, and they forgot that Hungary participated in the division of Czechoslovakia, because the map from 1939 does not show the part that Hungary, Poland, and Hungary and Poland took from Czechoslovakia in 1938 after the Munich agreements. So it starts. That's how the museum starts. But the museum is very well done. It was an extremely costly project. So after you leave the museum, you start, in a way, thinking in the way that the Hungarian government intends you to. And well, of course, the critique of communism is the one that probably most people would agree, non-divisive, the one, the presentation of Hungarian history until 1945 is, well, at least, let's say, very peculiar, and shows the way that the government can influence social perceptions of the past. Interestingly, Hungarian government wanted to do another museum a little bit in the same vein. It's supposed to be called House of Memories this time, and it's supposed to tell the story of Jews in Hungary during the Second World War, with a particular focus on the Jewish children deported from Hungary to concentration camps. However, the museum was built already in 2015, and it's still not open. It's just a huge building that remains empty because the protests of the Jewish organizations and the government of Israel led to the museum never being opened, and no one knows actually whether or not it will ever open. So here we have a rather unsuccessful example of an attempt at influencing collective memory. However, it remains to be seen how it will evolve. And in general, Hungary is an interesting case study in how governments can influence collective memories. because Terror Haza, the museum, the House of Terrors, was built already during the first Orban administration, so between 1988 and 2002. And Orban very famously said that with opening this museum, we shut the door on history. Well, of course, by the time he came back in 2010, he embraced the historical politics head fast. So, as I already mentioned, the preamble to the current Hungarian constitution that was adopted in 2011. The constitution itself was promulgated on Easter Day to symbolize the link that Hungary has with Christianity, and the preamble is full of references to the past, and it even categorizes events from the Hungarian history to those that Hungarians should be proud of and those that Hungarians are victims. No mention, of course, of any sort of involvement of Hungary during the Second World War and the Horthy regime. It also establishes the national commemoration days, and in general the preamble and certain other parts of the constitution sort of recreate in the contemporary times the narrative regarding the past that Hungary has. This is the second element next to the museums. There's of course the element of monument politics. Orban had a particular relationship with the monuments, so he decided that the square in front of the parliament in Budapest needs to be returned to how it looked before 1944. So this meant removal of the monument, for example, to Imre Nagy, the leader of the 1956 Hungarian Revolution. Why? Probably because Orban perceives him mostly as a communist and not a real fighter for freedom, so Imre Nagy ended up somewhere else, whereas a monument that was newly constructed and was not at all divisive for Orban could remain. So the square does not look like it looked in 1944 in truth, but it was a good argument. At the same time, we have still remaining the monument to the Hungarian, Russian right now, but Hungarian-Soviet friendship, and it's a very interesting one because it's actually protected by a bilateral agreement between the governments of Hungary and Russia, and it cannot be removed. This, of course, is because Hungary has a special relationship in a way with Russia at this time. However, because Viktor Orban likes playing on many different pianos, as we say in Poland, he allowed a monument to Ronald Reagan to be constructed on the same square. So if you ever in Budapest, it's quite a nice site. So you have this huge Soviet-style monument in one part of the square, but on the other side of the square you have a real-life Ronald Reagan who's strolling towards the Soviet monument. So this way, of course, we are all happy and placated. So both sides can say that that the memory is preserved in a particular way. Also, Orban also agreed for the monument to Bush Sr. to be constructed in the area, and also in one of the churches appeared a bust of Miklos Horthy, so the dictator from 1920s and 30s who collaborated with Hitler. And in general, during the time of Orban, suddenly all around Hungary, monuments or plaques or symbols have started appearing that commemorate Miklos Horthy in one way or another. And finally, the last part sort of this alignment of the Hungarian memory politics was the the return of memory of the Treaty of Trianon. So the Treaty of Trianon, 1920, ending the war officially between Hungary and the Allies, which confirmed, to be honest, the territorial losses that Hungary suffered due to the war. Hungary lost about 50% of its territory after World War I, and for various reasons that we won't get into right now. But the truth is that the treaty in 1920 already confirmed what has happened, because already in 1918 and 1990 these territorial losses were done. The treaty was in 1920. However, for Hungarians and for the successive Hungarian administrations, Trenov became the symbol of the shame and of betrayal of the West. So in the 1920s and 30s we had a number of monuments constructed around the country commemorating the Treaty of Trenov. During the communism, because everybody was part of the big Soviet Brotherhood, these monuments were either removed, as the one in Budapest, which actually served as the basis for the Soviet-Hungarian Friendship Monument. Others fell to disuse, and then we had a return of this memory already at the end of the 1980s, and with democracy, a big return to this memory. However, until Orban, it was not as well organized. So since the return of Orban to power in 2010, we've had a lot of new triennial monuments constructed all over the country. We've had funding being given to Hungarian organizations in Romania. The border blocks symbolizing old borders of Hungary have been constructed, and most famously, still next to the Parliament Square, a new monument appears. So now you can go down the streets, and all is from black marble, of course, to give the somber tone, and the names of all the Hungarian municipalities from 1911 are listed in Hungarian, of course, even though quite a lot of these are right now and have been back in the day as majority Slovakian, Romanian, even Polish. This, of course, is not something that Hungary's neighbors, especially Slovakia and Romania, are happy about. So there's usually some sort of terror, especially with the government of Romania, regarding the treatment of the Hungarian minority in Romania. And Orban famously gave the Hungarians living outside of the border voting rights, so these are very important. So they really connected with him since then, and he's become the protector. So for example, when Romania a couple of years ago banned the use of a flag, like a separatist flag, by the Hungarian minority living in Romania, then Orban ordered that this flag be put up in front of the parliament in Budapest all year long. So, as I said, Hungary is a good case study as to how these different facets of memory politics work. So we've talked about, again, the more obvious and visible ways as to how law and collective memory and politics interact. However, to start finishing, I still have a little bit of time, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. Okay. And as the main point of my book, in a way, was the conceptualization of what I call legal institutions of memory. So not institutions, public institutions that are created to deal with historical memory issues, but rather those institutions of law which have as their first or secondary goal somehow impacting how we perceive the past. So I distinguish 6 of them, so I'll describe them just briefly and giving a few examples just to finish. And I divided also them to 3 groups, so the soft ones, medium ones, and hard ones, depending on how much their goal is to impact the official narrative and how much they have other goals on the front. So the first 2, the soft ones, these are reparations and international tribunals. Reparations, obviously after the war or some sort of conflict, the attacking country is expected to pay the reparations, or at least engage in symbolic reparations. So something like a public apology, for example, which has become a very famous way of dealing with problematic and divisive historical issues in the last 2 decades. There are countries that have engaged in both. This is Japan, for example. However, the case of Japan is illustrative because it shows that the limits in the way of reparations, because various Japanese political figures have apologized to the Koreans. However, the Koreans feel that they still have not been officially apologized to, because there is no apology from a sitting prime minister or from the sitting minister or from the whole of parliament. And Japanese right now, various polls show that that they think that they have apologized enough over the years, and we should all move on from there. This is obviously one of the more complicated examples, but in general there's a lot of critique as to whether or not we can actually apologize for something, and what's the temporal limit. Quite often when there's call for reparations in the United States or the United Kingdom regarding slavery, there appears a question as to who exactly to apologize to. Japan is also a good case regarding material reparations. Most major powers and allies agreed not to take any reparations from Japan in the Treaty of San Francisco. However, smaller countries such as Indonesia and others in Southeast Asia, they wanted the reparations. However, the way that Japan did it, they did it quite masterfully on a political level, because the reparations were supposed to be material, so not cash, but actual machines, factory elements, and so on and so forth. And this was a time, of course, of the great decolonization, which meant that the Southeast Asian markets became emptied by the old colonizers, and Japan, under the guise of reparations, actually entered those markets which would otherwise they would not have been able to enter, as the old, not old, still very recent attacker of those areas. And in a matter of a couple of years, they managed to, in a way, addict those countries on Japanese technology, because all of those factories and machines that arrived in the different countries, well, they were Japanese, so the only place to get replacement parts and so on and so forth was from Japan. So we can see that reparations are not exactly the best way, perhaps, to cope with the past. The second of the soft legal institutions of memory, as I call them, are international tribunals. So usually we think about international tribunals and memory, and we think about criminal international tribunals, especially all the ad hoc ones. And of course, others, such as this so-called civil ones in a way, such as the CTHR or ICTHR, have both engaged with the matters of memory. However, we don't have time to delve into that, so turning attention to the criminal international tribunals, particularly the work of the Yugoslavian one, has been well studied, and its impact on collective memory. So a lot of studies show that ICTY managed to establish an official narrative of the war, where we had three groups, of course. So the Serbs as the attackers, Croatians as those who managed to win the war, and Bosnians as the victims. However, that's the narrative that went out to the general world. So that's how we think in Poland, probably that's how we think in France, and that's how we think in Canada or the United States. But that studies show that's completely not what happened in the Balkans, where basically every national and ethnic group has their own collective memories that were not at all, not in the least affected by the decisions of ICTY. And this is talking not only about Serbia, but Croatia, for example, as well. So international tribunals successful in a part, but one may ask if it's not an artificially created narrative that is being promoted by them. So these were the two soft ones. Now I'll move to the two medium ones. So these are lustration and truth and reconciliation commissions I mentioned before. Lustration, people in Central and Eastern Europe are usually quite familiar with. So in the book I actually decided not to analyze lustration on any case from our region, but the only other place where lustration was ever applied. And anyone knows what was the only non-European country which engaged in lustration after the war? Iraq. not the most obvious of the choices, yes, but the Americans decided that illustration will be the right, because it worked so well in Central and Eastern Europe, apparently, that they decided that this is the way to go for Iraq. So illustration is the process for those who are maybe not familiar, is the process of basically administratively checking whether or not somebody was a secret collaborator of the previous regime, and depending on the country this may have various impacts. So for example, in Poland there's a whole catalog of functions you cannot maintain if you collaborated with the secret police, but in Hungary, for example, the only thing it could have happened to you was infamy, and that was it. So Iraq, an interesting case, because the American administration that arrived decided to use lustration to purge the country from those who were collaborating or members of the Saddam Hussein's party Ba'ath. So actually the process of Iraqi illustrations is sometimes called debatification. However, so basically the idea was to go much further than any Central and Eastern European country did, because party members were not thrown out of their jobs and stripped of titles in our region. In Iraq, the situation was even more complicated, because quite often in order to even be able to be a teacher, you had to be a member of the party. So this process of debatification meant that suddenly a lot of educated people who were not necessarily in any way really connected to Saddam Hussein lost their jobs, and the country became such an unproblematic place as we know it today. I'm not going to go into details of how it progressed over the years, but again, lustration, perhaps a good idea in theory, but as we know from Iraq, in an extreme case, but from our own region, not necessarily one that can be realized well. So we have the second option. There's only one country that combined in a way both. So Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Romania had both lustration and Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but they did not have a proper Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So we say Truth and Reconciliation Commission because the most famous one, the one in South Africa, had that name, but actually most and originally the commissions appeared in South America, and most of them actually don't have the reconciliation part. They are just truth commissions, and it's actually a big difference, because in quite a few countries the commission is tasked just with revealing the truth about the conflict and establishing a new official narrative about what happened, but they're not necessarily tasked with the reconciliation part, so they don't have to provide. So these commissions don't have to provide recommendations and ideas about how this narrative can bring people together. They're just supposed to produce a report, and basically the regular authorities will take care of it from now on. So what is a truth commission? Since it's the basic way of doing this. The truth commission is basically the idea that we'll have a non-trial trial. So we have a judge or a commissioner or a couple commissioners. We have the perpetrators and we have the victims. However, the idea is not to punish anyone. The idea is to find out the truth and be collectively liberated in a way by it. So quite often, because of that, the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions or just truth commissions are linked with amnesty laws. So that was the case in South Africa, for example. Any perpetrator of apartheid could come before the commission, and if they told the truth, they would not be prosecuted. This proved extremely divisive because this was applied in many different countries. In Argentina, for example, the Supreme Court in the end stripped the amnesty laws, but it did not affect that many people as the activists thought they would. In Brazil, the Supreme Court held up the amnesty laws. So, thank you. The amnesty laws. So, the Brazilian truth commissions actually had a big problem with actually finding people who would cooperate with them because there was no incentive. The amnesty law in Brazil was blank, general, and was not, like in South Africa, connected with telling the truth. In Brazil, they did not have to do anything. Obviously, this is also impacted by the amount of atrocities a regime committed. The one in Argentina was particularly bloody. The one in Brazil, of course, it was bloody for those affected, but still the percentage was much smaller. So there was lesser social pressure to get the perpetrators before a commission, at least. So are Truth and Reconciliation Commissions or Just Truth Commissions successful? That's a good question, and one that's, again, we don't really have a good answer. In South Africa, we had a return, in a way, not to reconciliation, but from trend out of reconciliation in the last decade, where more and more people say that more should have been done to address the atrocities that were happened during the apartheid. In Brazil, on the other hand, the Commission produced a report, but no one really cared about it because it was in the middle of those political turmoil of 2014. The report is out there, the recommendations are out there, but it had very limited effect. So rather than it truly impacting the official narrative, it just remained one element of even counter memory for some of the people. So those were the two medium ones. And of course, to finish, we have the two hard ones, so the ones that actively engage and directly want to influence collective memory. So the first one is legal amnesia. So Martin already talked about amnesia memoria. This is one example. Quite often when we have a conflict, and this is quite often in non-European, non-Western societies, rather than remembering everything, the people want certain histories to be forgotten, and legal amnesia can come in handy. So it can take the form of amnesty, as I mentioned before. It can take a form of a global project of individual amnesties. So it turns out that this was what was done with those people who defected the draft to Vietnam. So one of the US presidents decided to give a rather broad blank abolition to the desertionists. But it can take also a form of more interesting and less used ways of dealing, of sort of reintegrating members of the former regime into society. So this was the case of Portugal. A lot of people forget because we talk about Franco, but Portugal was also a dictatorship until 1974. This year there was 50 years of the Revolution of Carnations, as it was called. Portugal is an interesting example because again, we had a country that had a very, very long-standing dictatorship, even longer than the one the one of Franco. We have founding member of NATO, another next to Spain. That was a right-wing dictatorship, and dictatorship that fell apart not really because the people decided that they had enough of it. It's because Portugal started fighting a lot of colonial wars in Africa and sending a lot of Portuguese people to fight them. So once we reached the breaking point in 1974, we have a revolutionary period for a little bit over 1 year. So people are thrown out of work, university professors, school teachers, the bank accounts of the members of the former regime are freezed. They all go to Brazil, which was much longer a military dictatorship. It's until 1985. So people are thrown out of work. Judges, lawyers, even people with often tangent relationship to the regime. Certain factory owners are also disposed of from having factories, and we enter a very difficult period. The summer of '75 even being called a hot summer because suddenly we have terrorist attacks between different factions in Portugal, and in general a big division between the north, which was has always been and was there more conservative, and the south, which was more left-wing liberal. However, what happens after this hot summer of 1975, most people in Portugal have had enough of the revolution. It happened, and now the idea is to come back as a society together. So, end of 1975, we have a counter-revolution. So we have a sort of conservative counter-revolution. So what happens after 1975 until with the new constitution, full new constitution being instilled in 1982, we have a process of reintegration of people into society. So people get back their jobs. Members of the former regime mostly stay in Brazil, but their bank accounts are unfreezed. They're allowed to come back to Portugal, and all but one decide to do that. Even members of this PIDE, the Secret Service, apart from very few that have already that are sentenced, they are released from jail for time served. And in Portugal, if we go right now, finding anything connected to the Portuguese Revolution or the memorialization of the victims of the regime is very hard to find. There's not a single monument in all of Lisbon to the victims of the revolution, the victims of the regime. There's really no monument to the revolution either. The only museum devoted to the regime is privately owned. So in Portugal we have the ideal of this old ancient rule of the national memoria. Really, we don't talk about the regime period, and we don't talk about the revolution and its problems either. Successful? Probably, because Portugal, these issues are not issues in Portugal, unlike in many different societies that have undergone a transition from a non-democratic regime to a democratic regime in the past 50 years. So maybe that's the way to go. And I'll finish with what I mentioned already at the beginning, so memory legislation. So the hardest of these legal institutions of memory. So memory legislation is this type of a legislation that tells us exactly how should we officially perceive the past. In Europe, it most often takes the form of Holocaust denial laws. So you cannot deny Holocaust publicly. And since 2008, all the EU member states are supposed to have a specific legislation that bans the denial of Holocaust in public. Not all of them have. Ireland and I think all of the Scandinavian countries decided not to implement this directive. They're saying that they are, but they're not really doing that, and 2008 was a long time ago. Martin mentioned the project, my other project, which is called Mnemonic Reality. So we're actually bringing together all of the 27 perspectives from all the member states and translating them into English to compare whether or not we can have a cohesive, if we actually have the cohesive Holocaust denial policy in the EU or not, as EU intended. But this is how it started. So the first this type of memory legislation appears in Germany in the 1980s, because for many years no one thought that Holocaust can be denied publicly, but in the 1980s, Germany, so these issues start appearing in the general public, so the response to have a law prohibiting it. Then France does the same in the early 1990s, and quite soon a lot of the Central and Eastern European states do that. However, suddenly we have calls from different sides to clear and allow only certain versions of history for more than just the Holocaust. So, for example, in Central and Eastern Europe, quite often you cannot deny Nazi crimes, but also communist crimes. In Poland, for example, we cannot deny also crimes committed by the Ukrainians against the Polish people during the Second World War. And many, many different ways that various countries decide to fight it. Famously, France decided to ban the denial of Armenian genocide. And the same goes for Switzerland, which actually, with Switzerland, it led to a very famous case before the European Court of Human Rights, Perinček versus Switzerland, with which I vehemently do not agree with the decision of the court there, because the court said that yes, Holocaust denial bans are permissible under the convention, but Armenian genocide, at least in Switzerland, is not permissible because, first of all, everyone that's been affected is dead, and secondly, Switzerland does not have any territorial connection with Armenia. This is, of course, wrong on both points, as I argue in my book. First of all, pretty soon, unfortunately, we won't have any Holocaust survivors either with us, probably in the next 10-15 years. And secondly, there are countries even in Europe which do not have any sort of link with the Holocaust, such as Portugal or Ireland, for example. So technically, if somebody wanted to deny Holocaust in Portugal and Ireland and then was sentenced, then on the basis of Perinche could come before the European Court of Human Rights and say, well, Portugal does not have any connection with the Holocaust, so how was I sentenced under the Holocaust denial ban? In any case, our memory legislation successful? Again, it's hard to say. Quite often it leads to a counter effect, so people start saying the prohibited thing as a way of protest. In many countries it's of complete disinterest to people because, especially in Europe, in other places like the US, of course, these things are protected by the First Amendment, so it would not be possible to ban Holocaust denial or anything else. And quite often it's political. Why France wanted to ban the Armenian genocide denial? Because Armenians are a very big lobbying group in France. In the interest of protecting them, the various French governments wanted to prove themselves to the Armenians living in France by doing this. In the end, in France we have a law that prohibits denial of any genocide, so a very big ban that's carefully phrased. So I don't think we've had a case since 2018 or 19 when it came into form, but it's something to be definitely watched. So bringing together and to conclude all the different strands, there's no obvious conclusion, I guess, to this, because obviously we live in a time where memory, politics and legal issues are here to stay. The whole official reason for the war of the Russian invasion that Putin's was spinning was based on exactly fabricated historical facts, but the ones that the Russians have been preparing for the society for many years. For example, in Karen's Russia, the national holiday is the day that the Poles left Moscow, burned Moscow and left Moscow. So you can see that which was not a major event in the Russian history, but that's the one that Putin chose when he became president as the national holiday to be celebrated. It was just a couple of days ago, actually. So choosing the good guys and bad guys in a very particular way, and that way preparing society in the long term. So for example, in Russia, the memory legislation goes much further, so you cannot criticize the Soviet heroes, for example, in a number of ways during the World War II. I'm not an expert, but Oleg Bulov is on those issues. So basically, the conclusion is that these issues are here to stay, and as we also get more globalized, these various discussions will be reaching different parts of the world, and we sometimes have very different perspectives, because yes, we want to remove Soviet monuments here, but when it comes to Confederate monuments on the south, some people will say that's a whole different issue. Some people will say that it's exactly the same issue. You don't want to have that sort of monuments in the public space. So again, no great answers, but education about these processes, I think, is the best thing we can do to have a think why we are remembering a particular situation that way and not the other, and hoping that we'll have more reconciliation in the end, rather than the ongoing conflicts that are fueled by official narratives. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, brief switch in the speakers, and then I'll give it back to the microphone. Thank you very much, Mirosław, for this really not only interesting and not only novel, but also rich in information presentation. So I believe it sits on the crossroad of many scientific discourses, such as memory politics, transitional justice, visual constitutionalism, some of which are kind of traditional, others are rather novel and gaining momentum after the visual turn in social sciences and humanities. And some of your examples remind me of some Bulgarian cases. So for example, a boulevard in Sofia was previously called Adolf Hitler. Then it was renamed into Georgi Dimitrov, who was the hero of Leipzig according to official communist ideology, right? If you go to Leipzig, and if you next to the Bundesverwaltungsgericht, next to the Supreme Administrative Court, you have still have the Dimitrovstrasse, you know. And now the current name is Maria Luisa, who is one of the Bulgarian queens after liberation. And even more interesting. In communism there was a public bath with swimming pools called Republika. Then it was called Maria Luisa, which is like calling Republic monarchy, and now it's being kind of left in despair in this destruction. And mentioning monuments, Sofia is also a rather interesting city in terms of visual semiotics. I'm not mentioning many of the cases, which are quite interesting, just maybe two of them. You have Ronald Reagan and Mahatma Gandhi sitting next to each other in the South Park, which is rather remarkable partnership, geographic partnership. But also, of course, the Soviet Monument Army, which is selectively deconstructed. So it is kind of a metaphor of the Bulgarian transition, because they removed the top figures, even claiming that they're going to maybe repair them and put them in the museum, but then
cut them into pieces.
And cut them into pieces, right? But then the rest is there. So I mean, it's a monument in transition, so to say. And this reminds me of of a very incredible German world called Selektiver Rückbau, selective deconstruction, which is something which happened with the Palace of the People, which is something like the Bulgarian National Palace of Culture in Berlin, because half of the people wanted to keep it because they have memories there yet, so it's a little bit like a time shelter, to quote the Bulgarian writer Georgios Klinov, whereas others wanted it demolished. So the municipality decided to selectively deconstruct it, but they deconstructed it fully. So now you have the reconstructed Palace of the Prussian Kings. Which is another interesting play with history, you know, replacing communist brutalist architecture with renovated, newly constructed Baroque palace in the center of Berlin, right? So we're facing such strange stuff everywhere, and I would say the most fascinating example is from the Bulgarian Balkan, from Stara Planina, which is that mountain which gave the name to the Balkan Peninsula, where you have something which resembles UFO. It's called Buzluja, and it's a symbol to the Bulgarian communist movement, but also it has been used to put some pop art graffiti on it, to vandalize it, but also it's currently being restored. So it's a good example of many layers of construction, deconstruction, and reconstruction as an ongoing project of different movements, right? I'm not going to speak about the graffiti on the Soviet Army monument, which are quite telling as well. I was just invited to be visiting professor in Italy. I'm going to teach visual semiotics, so that if you're interested, we can share about that. So a few words about the forthcoming lectures, and then I'm giving you the word for questions and comments on Mirosław's lecture. We have two more public lectures in this Constitutional Imaginary series this semester. The next one is on 2nd of December. It will be via Zoom, so if you're interested, I'm extremely active also on Facebook. You will see the link. And that's the lecture of somebody which we have mentioned many times, so he's maybe turning right now, scratching his nose or something like that.
He's in Korea, so probably he cannot sleep.
Exactly, he's in Korea, and that's Władysław Belov, who will speak about historical imaginary and mnemonic constitutionalism. That's on 2nd of December via Zoom, and then we'll have another prominent speaker, Professor Kliment Churchill from the University of Ghent. On 11th of December, we'll talk about displacing the constitution, modernity, sovereignty, and crisis. So it will be mostly related to this. constitutional transitions and memory politics in the interwar period, probably also exploring the Balkans. So this is just this short announcement of these two interesting lectures. And now you have the word to ask questions to Mirosław.
Thank you.
Crucify him. He came for that.
Not insured for a crucifixion. So
Not sure.
not insured for a
Not
crucifixion.
insured, okay. Feel free to ask all questions in the framework of legality and morality. And since we don't know anymore what is moral in the postmodern situation, and we're in Bulgaria, so it's not clear what is legal, you can ask everything you want.
That was very clear.
I'm not about to ask a question.
That's Associate Professor Jordanova from the University of Zornici Jordanova from the University of Ruse. So yeah.
Ruse is one of the cities in Bulgaria where the blocks of flats are also named.
All right.
Every block of flats has its name, except in the suburbs where they have just numbers.
Okay.
And when the communist regime ended, the names of the streets were changed, but not the names of the blocks of flats. And the previous mayor ordered that all the names of the blocks of flats are put and inked in front of the blocks. And some people were very surprised that they lived in a block named Second 5-Year Plan, 7th Congress, or Mirosław, or Lenin 1, or Lenin 2, or Lenin 3, and so on.
That's like a joke, but when did it happen?
But it's true.
But
and
when did it happen? In which
all
year?
the blocks of flats, they have names years before.
But that painting of these.
The painting was ordered by the previous mayor about 8 or 9 years ago. But every citizen which lived in this block years ago knows the name. But the new inhabitants, some of them didn't know the name of the block that they were living in. And some of them were surprised.
So I can imagine calling a taxi for the second 5-year plan block, going to the first year plan block.
And it's in the city center where the old public bath was.
On Democracy Street, for instance.
Democracy Street.
Yeah.
And we also have the Russian monument, which is not demolished in Russia. There are no Russian soldier monument. We have arguments if it should be demolished or not, but it's still in front of the youth park in Russia. So we still have some memories from the old regime. And also my street, where is the university also, it was called Komsomolska Street. Now it's called Studentska Street. But the block of flats which is in front of the university is still called Komsomolets.
Okay. Thank you very much. Because we're running out of time, I would just like to see whether there. So Professor Larikata Baker.
It was an excellent speech, very rich. And I just want to make 3 tiny little points that I drew from. So it's not either criticism or commentary, it's just what I drew from it, but very interesting avenue. So the first goes to semiotics. And there are a couple of points that were interesting. Throughout your discussion, I kept, and maybe you can help me figure this out, there's this tension or this dynamic in the way in which these descriptive things were created between semiotic firstness, semiotic secondness, and semiotic thirdness. That is, these tensions between the objectivity of collective memory, that is collective memory itself an object, which is then semiotically potent, or are we looking at the inside, that is the signification of this object by looking at its text, and are we in that context creating multiple layers of semiosis, both within and outside of the text. And then of course the big thing here wasn't either with semiotic firstness, objectivity, or semiotic secondness, which is signification, but rather with the interpretation, the collective interpretation, which is critical. But for me, the fascinating thing as you were going through it was actually to look beneath that to the interactions, the tensions and the contradictions between the firstness and the secondness element of the thing. So that was just the semiotic thing. Including, for example, the preamble, I was starting to lose myself in text as word symbols and then symbols as text. But anyway, so there's that. The second one is to draw an older template. As you were going through this, I kept thinking, well, your office of memory, the Holy Office, and what you're really talking is you're talking orthodoxy and heresy in a moving target. And indeed, there's an older template, a pre-semiotic semiosis, that may be useful in thinking through this, especially since that older template exists and permeates Eastern Europe in different ways. Polish Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, down south, et cetera, et cetera. So that was kind of interesting. You guys haven't, the Holy Office thing is still very potent. And then my last and just very brief thing is we focus a lot on communication and on performance. But I wonder whether we ought to think about belief. And you mentioned belief as the kind of the counter memories. But it's very interesting. I see this all over the place, and I certainly saw it in Cuba, where in fact the Orthodox are very happy as long as the performance is correct. Everyone goes to the Plaza de la Revolución when the nomenclatura goes and make their speeches. But everyone who goes there is either not listening or could care less, or actually reconstructing the counter memories with every word that is coming out. So you've got this kind of dissonance in performativity. But anyway, so that's just very briefly.
Okay, one more maybe. One last one.
Yeah, Maria, I just would like to say that Maria is the last one because there is an abundance of professors waiting for us, hungry professors, not from Hungary, but very hungry. So we have to pick them up in 10 minutes, and Maria is the last one who can ask a question.
My name is Maria Dimitrova. I work at the Ministry of Justice as an agent before the court in Strasbourg, the European Court of Human Rights. And when in your lecture, thank you very much for it, it was very interesting. It reminded me of a case against Bulgaria that we had about this monument of Dimitar Blagoev in a city close to Sofia, where one person actually put a Christmas hat and a bag next to the monument one night a few years ago. And then he was sanctioned with a fine for that. He went to court. The court actually upheld the fine. And then he went to Strasbourg. Strasbourg sentenced Bulgaria, found a violation of freedom of speech. And then so there were a lot of interactions between actually the memory of the people, then the provocation, then how the judges are thinking about the case, then the supranational court. And then what is really interesting is that one of the judges, the Bulgarian judges who decided on the case, called the Ministry of Justice, called me, and he said, I know about this judgment, and I know that Bulgaria was found guilty. There was a violation of the convention, and now I look at the case from another perspective, and I would like to pay what Bulgaria has to pay to the applicant. I'd like to pay this compensation that the court awarded because I feel guilty for this case. So here I find a lot of sort of interactions between several national, supranational, and sort of one of the judges who sat in the case in Bulgaria, he called me.
Oh, really?
Yes, he called me.
That's incredible.
One of the judges in Blagoevgrad said, okay. So yeah, just to maybe to be.
It's shocking morality.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, I'll reply very quickly. I guess.
3 seconds, John.
3 seconds. So first, street name changes. So that's of course very interesting always, and whether or not the name change catches up or not. So like in my city, for example, there is very easy to see if somebody is actually has the family coming from this city, because they call one square still the first May square. And I do that myself because my parents do that, my grandparents do that, but newcomers know it as John Paul II Square, and they would be very surprised if I told them to go to First May Square. And also because it's a democracy street, so in my city we had the street of friendship, Soviet-Polish friendship, so they didn't know how to change it, so they just cut the Soviet-Polish part and it's just a friendship street right now. So, interesting while. So semiotics and layers. So Larry, thank you again for the wonderful comment. So just very briefly with layers. So I didn't want to introduce too many theoretical terms, but there are these two concepts of agents of memory and carriers of memory. So agents of memory are those who actively engage in the memory politics, and carriers are supposed to be everything that carries, so monuments and so on. But these days with media, and especially social media, we have something that is both an agent and a carrier. So that complicates things quite a lot. Regarding the dissonance and performance, so in the book I actually wrote quite a lot about Durkheim and so his perception of social rituals, and in particular that law in modern societies, law replaced religion as the main organizer of social life, and this is also my argument why law is so important when discussing all of these ideas. And regarding the monument case, it sounds very interesting. In Poland, actually, when the previous government came to power, they tasked the Institute of National Memory with preparing the list of all the street names and all the monuments that still were not changed or removed after 1989, and it led to a number of administrative court cases, for example. So in Łódź, so there was a street, Freedom or Liberty Square, and everybody knew that it was because the name was given by the communists. It was supposed to be of 1949. Victory Square. So it was supposed to be the victory over Nazism. So the government, so the National Institute of Memory, put this name on the list to be changed, but the government did not want to pay for the change, so they just added the plaque under the name of the street that is actually Victory of Poland over Soviets in 1920. And regarding the monuments, there are quite a few very interesting cases that ended up at the High Administrative Court, because from south of Poland, so there was somebody who was a communist but also a local hero for the people, so they did not want his monument removed. So the case ended up in the court, and the court had to decide what is more important. And it's visible in the judgment, like which values are more important. And the court decided in this case that the fact that he was a communist means that he cannot be celebrated in a public space. But it was also a very divisive thing, and I'll stop here. We can continue over dinner, I guess.
I strongly believe that this concept of layered narrative is quite involved in this, and we witnessed these different layers. We see also variable, narrators in different semiotic games, both textual, contextual. So that's something which I also explore in my book on constitutional semiotics. Okay, thank you very much for coming here. It was a great pleasure for us. Let's clap for Mirosław amazing lecture, and I hope to see you tomorrow. We have a very interesting conference on legal imaginaries of pride and fear at 9 o'clock in the new conference hall. You're all welcome. You'll see how constitutional darkness and dark feelings in public law in general, including public international law, are signified, practiced through social imaginaries. Thank you very much. We have also a very prominent colleague among us as Professor Larry Kata-Baker, who is, I would say, one of the most important authors in constitutional semiotics. He's one of the most cited authors in my book as well. So you can see him talking, not only asking questions, but delivering a wonderful speech tomorrow, as well as many other colleagues. Thank you very much, and see you on the other events in our beautiful project in Glasgow. Thank you.
Thank you for your question.